Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen, and joining us early. On my left is, if you don't know, this is Brian Sibley, who did a radio adaptation of Gormenghast. When was that? What was the date, Brian?
I don't know. When was it? It was last autumn, last summer.
Okay, fairly recently. Okay. And these are three of our four writers who've been involved in the adaptation of this particular stage production, and I haven't been personally introduced. We have Prudence.
Yes.
That was the easy one. And it's Max and Richard, and I don't know which way around it is.
Max. Richard.
I'm Dan, I run Iris Theatre, which is the resident theatre company here, and I wouldn't say co-produced, that sounds grander than it is, but this production was done in association with us. We provided logistical and emotional support. And that's about all, really. No artistic support.
And the bar.
And the bar, the wonderful corner. So we've only got half an hour, so I want to get started straight away. I'll ask a few questions that I've been primed with on my primer list, and then I'll open it to the floor. Particularly, I think the cast may have questions that they may have been burning to ask the writers, like, why did you make me say that? Or something along those lines. So now is your chance. But first of all, I wanted to turn to you, Brian, and say, you may have some questions for Brian as well, and vice versa. What did you regard as the particular challenges of adapting the Gormenghast series of books?
Well, I've dramatised these books twice. The first time I dramatised them, I dramatised the first two books. The last time, more recently, I did all three books, plus elements from Maeve Gilmore's fourth book that was published last year. And I knew Maeve Gilmore very well. I never knew Mervyn Peake, but I did know his widow very well. And indeed, I was able to read my first version of the dramatisation to her when she was still alive. So I had a very heavy burden in the sense that I also had the widow of the author, as it were, not exactly breathing down my neck, but certainly looking over my shoulder.
Yep.
And I've known the family for years. I used to be chairman of the Mervyn Peake Society, so very close association with the books. And one of the hard things about having a close association with any project that you're trying to turn into something else is that you feel slavishly devoted to it, and it's very, very hard to make those cuts and make those decisions. But the hardest thing, and to answer your question really, is the hardest thing is that these books exist in a world that you have to be able to believe in, which is surreal at times, is full of all kind of weird imagery, sort of baroque embellishments. And you have to be able to believe in these characters, which are extraordinarily larger than life.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a great affinity between Peake and Dickens. Peake loved Dickens. He illustrated one of Dickens' books. He clearly responded to these extraordinarily big, emotional and dramatic characters, and the whole naming of them, in fact, is very Dickensian in a way. But the secret of Peake's writing lies in the way in which he describes place, the way he describes a sense of the place that is Gormenghast.
Yep.
And if you lose that identity, it's very hard to keep that identity because it's in the narrative voice. And so for me, that was the greatest challenge. I've talked a bit to the writers of this in the past, and I know that this is a challenge, but you strip all that away, and what you're left with can, if you're not careful, sound a bit just weird, meaningless, vacuous, or whatever. So you have to somehow keep the embodiment of the character, and that is a huge challenge.
Okay. So sort of, I will open this moment. A follow-up to that, that's one of our resident cats, ladies and gentlemen, who are always in the as a follow-up to that, I suppose, sort of following on from what you're saying, because the character of the place is such a strong character within the book, how does one, and can one, translate some of that character into dialogue? Because I suppose what you're saying is, in some ways it might be easier to do a film script or a TV adaptation, where you get to describe the environment, to something as stripped back as a radio play, where you only have the voice, really.
Well, it has sound as well, of course, but you're right, yes, it is a huge challenge. And in both my productions, I opted to have some kind of narrative voice. The first time I used somebody who I called the artist, the idea being that because I wanted Peake's voice to come through, and he actually interrupted the dialogue and commentated on it. And then the second time I used Titus as his own storyteller,
right,
but talking to the artist Mervyn Peake, which was a kind of curious device. But when May Dumont wrote her fourth book, she ends it with Titus making this journey, and he arrives at a small island, doesn't name it, but it is the island of Sark, where Mervyn Peake lived and worked, and he arrives on the dock, and there is a tall, lean, dark-eyed man waiting to meet him, and they are reunited. So I just took it one step further and thought, having met his creator, as it were, he then starts telling his story, and the story that he tells is reinforced by the pictures that he finds in the artist's studio. So that was my device. But I think it is a challenge. But there is so much richness, which I know that it must have been an enormous challenge for you to know what to leave out, because the richness of the books is so intense in a way that it becomes almost difficult, impossible, in fact, to let go of anything. I'm really intrigued to know how they cut it, because to let go of any detail almost feels like you're doing sort of a terrible injustice to Mervyn Peake.
Well, as a follow-on question to that, yeah, I'd love all feel free to speak at the same time. Yeah, please join us. Is that another one of our writers? Poppy, get on stage, love. You don't get out of this. You were spotted. How did you? Well, there's sort of two related questions. Following on, sort of reiterating Brian's question, which is how does one cut and take a very large novel and turn it into a stage play? And particularly, how did you manage that process as a team of writers, as opposed to a single writer?
Well,
how did you avoid killing one of them?
Exactly.
Our editor Vicky held us apart with broom handles and things. Yeah.
I think much of the key lies in Vicky, who isn't here unfortunately. But I think the entire process would have been even more impossible than it was without her. It was sort of obviously trying to write a play with 4 playwrights and have that be Gorgonblast is sort of a completely outlandish challenge. But Vicky's sort of obscenely analytical mind, but also appreciation of how things should fit together artistically, were definitely the only way it would be possible. But I think having that meant that we had to look at it at all times from a kind of analytical perspective and dissect it into bits and work out who would be writing what, meant that you couldn't be quite as emotive about the pieces you would. And I think if any of us, I know if I did sat there on my own trying to write it, I'd have probably just copied out the entire book by hand and waved it around.
Well, I think that's kind of, I know I kind of found myself when first writing some of the scenes doing pretty much that, and then got to the end of the thing going, I have just copied the book, I may as well have just, I don't know, scanned it in and handed it to where they go, there you go, there is the play. And I think, speaking for myself, a lot of self-control and self-discipline was needed to kind of cut things out. And even then, I mean, after the first read-through we did, which would have run to 4 hours if we not stopped it, we realised we still haven't been quite as disciplined, so we locked ourselves in the kitchen and just went through a pen and just really had to be very brutal with it. But I think it was, as you were saying, Max, almost because we focused on little bits and then were able to hand those around for others to edit, and so you didn't feel quite attached to what you had in front of you. You hadn't written it, you could look at it but far more subjectively. And so, I know I did the first pass of the Reveries and thought, yeah, it's pretty good, and they gave it to Poppy, and Poppy's came back all different order, and bits that I really like were missing, but I read through it and went, no, that's better. And I think with all scenes we looked at other people's edits and thought, this is fantastic.
Yeah, that was the crucial thing really. In order to get one voice, was that we had to keep passing the scenes around and rewriting each other's scenes in order for it to have this one voice, so it didn't come from 4 distinct voices. And I think that's how it worked. I mean, each of us had characters that we particularly enjoyed writing, or parts of the book we wanted to focus on, but I think it was that just passing it round and around that really helped to get one voice.
Prudence, perhaps. How was it managed? So, from what I say, you initially divided the label up in terms of scenes or sections, and then used this process to track that makes sure that it all matched. But how was the character arc for each individual character kept on track and made sure that the single most important thing in drama, particularly stage drama, is that you have strong arcs for each character. So did you have conversations about that, or were particular people assigned particular characters? Or?
I think, as Poppy said, we probably all specialised really in a specific character and then all edited one another. But one of the problems that came up with the first version of the script was that we hadn't written chronologically, and we had a basic idea of the chronology of the book itself. So actually, I think within the first half an hour something happened that was then repeated an hour later. And people had come out to read it for us, and they kind of read a scene that seemed bizarrely similar. It's like, oh no, we've written it with big repetition. So
we also realised that Steerpike featured very, very little.
Yes,
Steerpike
didn't say anything.
Yeah, we found, and I think because of the book, we didn't get an idea of who Steerpike was because he's such a chameleon. He goes into a room and he becomes this person to suit whatever needs. So he's who he is when he's with the twins, and he's whoever he is when he's with the Prune Swallows. And I think we did a really good job of writing that. But then we kind of step back and when we actually don't know who Steerpike is himself, because a lot of it is description or kind of his thoughts within the book rather than anything said out loud. So we then had to go back and try and work out how we could give him a better arc, because otherwise it'd be sporadic instances of being this character and that character, and you didn't quite understand why he was doing what he was doing.
He is the motor that drives the story, and I know I found it incredibly difficult moving on to the third book, that with no Steerpike, and not in no Steerpike, but a different place altogether, a different part of the world that's much closer to our world, in fact almost a futuristic world. It felt almost impossible. The end of the, not giving away anything clearly, no spoilers, but however it ends tonight, that moment is kind of the great climax, and I think you just have to acknowledge somewhere along the line that Steerpike, however intriguing and beguiling all those other characters are, that it is Steerpike's story. You have to follow that story.
In terms of the characters, there is a difference in my mind from the Dickens. I really see that kind of parallel. But I think in Dickens you always have a kind of someone to root for. Do you root for anyone in Gormenghast, and does it matter if the audience has someone to root for?
I think you do. I mean, I think you root for Fuchsia, because Fuchsia begins, she's a kind of Juliet type, Ophelia type character, more Ophelia really. But she seems innocent, naive, but then she becomes very strong. I think I root particularly for Dr. Prince-Squalor, because Prince-Squalor begins as this kind of braying buffoon, and he seems when you first meet him to be a complete idiot, and he is no consequence. He is just a fool. But out of that foolishness comes huge strength, and he is the person who then empowers or enables Titus to become empowered. So I think Prince-Squalor is the character that I see as being the one that you most identify with.
Right.
For all his eccentricities, he's the character that somehow he's essentially a good person. There are other people with good motives and intentions in the story, but he is just quintessentially good. And when he drops the bizarreness, you just see him as good, and you see him as someone who is going to fight for what's right. So that's where I think the other energy is. I see those in a way as being the 2 points of the energy.
That's interesting. I'm going to ask 2 questions now, which sound contradictory. So first of all, why do you think that Gormenghast is particularly well suited to a theatrical interpretation? Why is it good for theatre? What makes it good theatre?
I think Mervyn Peake's language that he employs and the dialogue between characters is some of the most extraordinary stuff ever committed to paper, and I think it deserves to be heard. And one of the massive illicit thrills in this was writing words that he didn't write, but kind of trying to believe yourself and think that maybe he might have approved of them, but not immediately backhanded you for attempting to, employ his style. I think the characters are so strong, and the dialogue it sings on the page, which is such a cliche, but it really does. Every single person is almost immediately identifiable in the first 3 words that they say, and you know in your head what they sound like and what they look like. And I think the characters alone, the human characters, let alone the incredible, that might come to the next question, I suspect. But yeah, I think the people make it worth, are a huge part of why it should be staged.
Anything to add, Poppy, at all?
It's so just gorgeously visual when you read it. You can see everything, and there's just such detailed descriptions of the setting, and I just wanted to see it, really.
I think that came down to a lot of it, everyone just loving it so much, wanting to see it in front of you live, and these characters that you love up there. But also the writing has a pace and a rhythm, and it's so poetic, and again, it just to have it, particularly in a place like this, kind of ringing off the walls, these beautifully kind of written scenes, I know it's possible, but it just the opportunity to do that was very, very appealing.
And were there any parts that jumped out of you? Have you all seen the show now?
No.
Who has? Okay, then the question for you. Is there anything that when you sat and watched the show, it jumped out in a way that surprised you and you didn't expect that moment to resonate as strongly as it did?
Yeah, a few actually. The battle between Flay and Swelter, and how, again, not wanting to kind of spoil things, but the way that goes. I was here for the tech, and they did it then, and without really much, it was all kind of light, and I was just sat there and other things and bangs and crashes going on. But I remember just sitting with you there, just going and feeling really tense. I know exactly what's going to happen, but my God, that really did. It impressed me greatly, and then seeing it in full costume, etc., was really good as well. Also, the revelries, which I enjoyed, the writing of so much, was just really enjoyable, and was made so much better than I thought it could be. I mean, I knew it would be good, but it was just the way it's done is not how I thought it would be done, and just works really, really well. And so that was,
I really look forward to seeing that, because in both my productions I cut the reveries. I used material from it but cut them because I felt it was something that was too long for me to handle just in sound. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that. If I could ask a question, Dan, I'd like to I'm very intrigued to know how you set about conveying the sense of place, because, which I suppose is what you were saying earlier, but one of the things that strikes me about the book is from the very first paragraph, Mervyn Peake assumes you know where this place is. He says Gormenghast, by which I mean the main body. He doesn't say there's a place somewhere called Gormenghast. He just assumes from the moment you read that opening paragraph that this is somewhere that you will have accepted exists. Yeah. And that acceptance, which you somehow go along with, rather as you were saying about the characters, almost immediately, then is what is the backdrop against which all of this stuff is played out. And I have always felt that there is a sense in which Gormenghast is itself a place. And the very first production done on radio from Mervyn Peake himself, he gave a voice to Gormenghast. An actor who the older people here will remember, called Valentine Dial, who used to tell sort of ghost stories called as the Man in Black. He was the voice of Gormenghast. And Peake wrote this dialogue which sort of says, I am Gormenghast, come with me down my corridors, listen to the echo of the pipe. And so he personified the place. And when I knew that, I didn't dare do the same thing. but it is interesting. I'm just intrigued as to how you, apart from scenery, how you convey the place.
You did sound.
I think, as we were working on the sad assumption that we weren't able to build a life-size replica, which was obviously everyone's first intention, it seemed that a lot of it, obviously everything about the ponderous tone of Gormenghast kind of seeps off every page. And we wanted that, we wanted to evoke that as best we could. I felt that perhaps the best way was to look at the kind of the ritual, which is so inextricably linked up with it, and in the same way that the walls are kind of endless and eternal, so too is every single kind of bizarre act that takes place on a daily basis at this time has that at the time of Memorial. So yeah, giving some of that sense of it, at least the kind of sort of the grand, sprawling, perplexing, sort of endless pace of the place was a way of that.
So you inject, if not the specifics of the space, the rhythm and the kind of the shape in a kind of abstract sense.
And to maintain that continuity, Poppy came in one day and had written, that might be a plot spoiler. But there is a character that we use to reveal. Cowboys. But there's one character who I would say for us symbolised kind of the integrity of the castle, and unfortunately at some point passes away, and Poppy turned them into a ghost character. So I think that's non-specific enough to be I'm going to pass that to you, Poppy, to speak on in greater depth.
Yeah, I guess that was just because it felt like he symbolised the tradition of the castle, which is so important. So it kind of felt he needed to oversee the tradition.
Yes.
We have 5 minutes, so I just wanted the chance to offer to the audience the opportunity to ask any questions. So has anyone got any burning issues we wanted to raise?
Burning questions.
Yes.
Is it true or false question?
Yes.
So, is it true that Peake, Gormenghast Castle is Arundel Castle? And is it true that he used to wear a tall black hat and carry a staff and a cane and run around supermarkets? Run down spaces? Is that true?
I've never heard the story of the tall black hat and the cane. I've never seen a picture of him other than wearing a kind of rather scruffy raincoat and a kind of sort of trilby. Arundel Castle certainly was somewhere that he was very aware of. It was a local location. I think it's been rather overplayed for that it's the basis of Gormenghast. I've always thought we have this obsession. I don't know, I think it's universal, I think it's the British, but we do have an obsession with having to nail the origins of things. We have to be able to say, where did it come from? We can't believe that a character like Dr. Prunescholar or Mr. Toad or umpteen other characters, Captain Hook, have ever been created just by the will of the person who writes the story. We have to say, no, it was actually based on his secondary school teacher in geometry or whatever. So Arundel, certainly he was aware of and knew Arundel Castle, and it is an imposing building. But, Gormenghast is 500 Arundels stuck together, and a bit of Bodiam and Stockley and Edinburgh and every other castle in the world you can think of. Because, there are points in the second book where people are visiting parts of Gormenghast that they have never visited before. They're unaware that there was this bit of Gormenghast. So it's not as simple as saying that. But the staff and the hat, no, never heard that story. I think that's pure fantasy. It's a nice idea.
Anyone else? John? Yes.
It's hard, seems to be odd, why the owl was chosen as opposed to, if it's a death one, as opposed to a raven, which is normally what you get in 7 days, not just the Scottish one, but the raven or that part. Do you have a feeling?
After that, to the writers who know more than I, is there anything particular about the imagery and the iconography of the owl that springs to mind and why that is used as an image of death?
Not necessarily as an image of death, but I think the owl for me is synonymous with Lord Groan, really. It can be seen as a symbol of Lord Groan. I think the knowledge, the wisdom that we associate with owls as a bird, it seems like, I guess, his perfect animal counterpart, really. And the fact that the owl turns from a symbol of wisdom to something that represents death and destruction works perfectly with the Arkhams character. So I think while a raven is more historically fitting, or fits more in terms of literary tropes, the owl is actually perfect for the character, I would say.
Is that because it's more, rather than a journey to death, it's a journey to madness? Is it about that wisdom, madness?
Yeah, and because Lord Groan, his kind of prized possessions of his books, and that's where he finds his solace, that's where the strength of his character comes from, it's from his knowledge, his constant pursuit of knowledge. So I think that owl works in terms of the character as opposed to being necessarily the perfect symbol for death, even though it does become